The sharp whine of the Terran scout ship's engines had been a constant hum in the empty darkness of space. It was supposed to be a routine mission, a simple recon trip to an uncharted planet in the Outer Rim. But nothing went as planned. Sergeant Cole Maddox sat in the cockpit, eyes fixed on the blinking red lights. His hands gripped the controls tight, trying to steady the ship as it spiraled through the atmosphere. The sky outside was a swirl of red and orange, clouds clashing against the hull like waves against a rocky shore. The ship's automated systems were failing. His communicator was dead, and the crash seemed inevitable. "Come on, hold together, you stubborn piece of metal," Cole muttered through gritted teeth. Sweat ran down his face as the ship shook violently, the ground growing closer with every second. Then, with a deafening crash, the world tilted sideways, and the ship slammed into the dry, desolate landscape below. When Cole regained consciousness, everything was still. The wreckage of the ship was scattered around him, pieces of metal twisted and torn. His chest burned from the seatbelt's tight grip, and his head throbbed with a pounding ache. His ears rang from the crash, and the smell of burnt circuitry filled the air. But it was the pain that made everything clear. His arm was broken, his leg was twisted at an unnatural angle. His ribs were cracked, and his chest felt like it was being squeezed. He tried to move, but the agony shot through him like fire. He clenched his teeth and struggled to breathe. He had to get out of the wreckage. His breath was shallow, but he fought to stay conscious. Using his good arm, he managed to pry himself free from the remains of the ship, dragging his broken leg behind him. He needed to find shelter. He needed to survive. The desert stretched out in every direction. There were no signs of life, no trees, no animals. Just endless sand, broken only by scattered rocks and a few jagged hills in the distance. The air was thick with dust, the sun burning overhead. It was as if the planet itself was trying to swallow him whole. "Come on, Maddox," he whispered to himself, forcing his feet to move, one step at a time. His legs screamed with every movement, but he pushed on. His life depended on it. If he didn't find help soon, he would die here. Unseen, a pair of eyes watched him from the shadows of a nearby dune. Rinya, a young alien girl, crouched low, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never seen a human before, and the sight of him, struggling to stand and dragging his broken body through the sand, was unlike anything she had ever imagined. Her people had always told her that humans were weak, fragile creatures, but this was something else. She had been following the strange object that had fallen from the sky for hours, curious yet cautious. When she had first seen the ship, plummeting toward the planet's surface, she thought it was just another sign of the chaos and destruction that had followed her people's exile. But then she saw him, a human, and she couldn't look away. He was in pain. That much was clear. His movements were slow and deliberate, and the way he gritted his teeth against the suffering showed a kind of strength that Rinya had never seen before. Her people had no concept of humans, other than their reputation for being weak, but what she saw now challenged everything she had been taught. She knew she should turn away. She should return to her people and report the crash. But something in her held her there, hidden behind a rock, watching him struggle. Cole finally made it to the base of a rocky hill and collapsed against the stones, gasping for air. His body was failing him, and he knew it. His vision blurred, and his thoughts began to drift. The pain was too much. His head swam with dizziness, and he knew he couldn't move much longer. And then, through the haze, he saw a figure, a shadow against the blinding sunlight. It was a girl. No, a woman, though she was unlike anyone Cole had ever seen. Her skin was a deep shade of violet, with intricate patterns that shimmered in the sunlight. Her hair was long, flowing like silk in the wind. She was tall and lithe, but there was a certain grace to her movements that made her seem almost otherworldly. She was watching him. Her eyes were wide with curiosity, but there was no fear, just a strange kind of interest. Cole blinked, trying to focus. Was he imagining things? The sun was messing with his head. The dehydration, the blood loss. Everything was blurring together. But then the girl took a step forward. Slowly, cautiously. She didn't speak, but her gaze was steady, as if waiting for him to do something. Cole's heart pounded in his chest, but he couldn't summon the strength to stand. He barely had enough energy to lift his head. "Help," he whispered, his voice barely more than a rasp. The girl didn't respond. She just stared at him, her eyes full of questions. Cole's head fell back against the rock as darkness began to close in. The last thing he saw before losing consciousness was the girl's silhouette, standing tall against the harsh sun, her face soft with a strange expression. Was it pity? Curiosity? He didn't know, but he hoped that somehow she would help him. Cole awoke to the sound of soft footsteps in the sand. His eyes fluttered open, and he found himself lying on the ground, the rough stone pressing against his back. The sun was lower, now casting long shadows over the desert, and his head felt heavy. He could still taste the dust in the back of his throat. For a moment, panic flared. Had he been abandoned? Was he still alone on this strange planet? He tried to move, but the pain in his leg shot through him like a knife. He gasped, gritting his teeth. Then he remembered. The girl. The alien. His thoughts were clouded with confusion, but as his blurry vision cleared, he saw her standing a few feet away. She was close, but she didn't come any closer. She stood there, her body straight and still, watching him with those large, curious eyes. Her violet skin shimmered in the fading light, and her long hair moved gently in the wind. Cole tried to sit up, but winced at the sharp pain in his ribs. His arm throbbed with a deep ache. He glanced down at his broken leg, twisted at an odd angle, and groaned in frustration. There was no way he could stand on his own. "Help," he managed to say, his voice weak and strained. His words were barely more than a whisper. The girl didn't respond right away. Instead, she stepped closer, slowly and carefully, as if testing whether he would react. She knelt down beside him, her movements graceful but cautious. Cole's breath hitched in his chest. She was close now, closer than he had expected. Her eyes flickered toward his broken leg. Then she reached out, and for a moment, Cole's heart skipped a beat. Was she going to attack him? He couldn't even defend himself. He was vulnerable, injured, but the girl's touch was gentle, far from threatening. She carefully placed her fingers on his leg, just above the injury. Cole tensed, preparing for pain. But instead of hurting him, the alien girl's touch felt cool, almost soothing. Her fingers seemed to glow faintly like soft pulses of light. He blinked, trying to understand what was happening. She didn't speak, but he could see the concentration in her face. There was something calming about the way she worked. Despite the unfamiliarity of her touch, Cole felt an odd sense of relief. The pain in his leg eased a little. She wasn't healing him. No, it wasn't like that. It was more like she was easing the worst of the pain, trying to stabilize him, trying to help him. Rinya glanced up at him, her face full of silent understanding. She gestured toward his broken arm, then back at his ribs. Her eyes were asking, "Can you handle this?" Cole nodded slowly, though he was uncertain how much longer he could stay conscious. He'd never been in this kind of situation before, stranded on a distant world with an alien who didn't speak his language, yet seemed intent on helping him. The girl, Rinya, took his arm, examining the twisted bone. Her touch was careful, gentle, as she moved her fingers along the broken sections. Cole winced as the pain flared, but there was something about her that kept him calm. He knew, somehow, that she wasn't a threat, not like the creatures he had read about in reports. She was different. Rinya shifted her position and brought out a strange object from a pouch at her waist. It looked like a small metal disc, etched with glowing symbols. She placed it on the ground, then began to focus on it, her fingers brushing. over its surface. A soft hum filled the air, and Cole's eyes widened. He had no idea what it was, but it was unlike anything he had seen before. Rinya pressed the disc against his broken arm. The hum grew louder for a moment, then faded. Cole felt a warmth spread through his arm, and to his surprise, the pain lessened. It didn't heal completely, but it was bearable now. She repeated the process with his leg. The hum of the device seemed to soothe his injury, though he could still feel the broken bone beneath the skin. But somehow it didn't hurt as much. His breathing became steadier, and for the first time since the crash, he felt a flicker of hope. Rinya didn't look at him for approval. She didn't seem to need it. She was simply doing what she felt was necessary. And that was something Cole couldn't ignore. She didn't speak, didn't ask for anything in return. She just helped. After a long silence, Rinya stood up, wiping her hands on the sand. She pointed to the horizon where the sun was sinking lower, casting an orange glow over the landscape. Cole followed her gaze. The sky was shifting into twilight, and the temperature was beginning to drop. He knew he couldn't stay out here much longer. He needed shelter. He needed food. "Where?" he whispered, still struggling to understand. "Where should I go?" Rinya turned her head toward him, her expression unreadable. She didn't answer with words. Instead, she made a gesture, a simple motion with her hand, as if to say, "Follow me." It wasn't much, but it was something. Cole could hardly stand, let alone walk, but he knew this was his chance. He had no choice but to trust her. With her help, he stood shakily, leaning on the rocks for support. His leg buckled beneath him, and he almost fell. But Rinya was there in an instant. She caught him with surprising strength, holding him up as though he weighed nothing. Her grip was firm, but not harsh. It was as if she had done this many times before, helping those in need. Maybe not humans, but she had helped, and that was enough. They began moving toward the distant hills. Each step was slow, but Cole couldn't help but feel a strange sense of gratitude. She hadn't abandoned him. She hadn't left him to die alone in the desert. Rinya was showing him a kindness that felt strange. Her people didn't trust outsiders. She had no reason to help him. And yet, here she was, guiding him through the wasteland. As they walked, Cole realized something. He wasn't alone anymore, and maybe, just maybe, there was a chance he could survive. The journey across. The desert was longer than Cole had expected. The sun sank lower and lower, turning the sky into a canvas of oranges, purples, and deep blues. The cold night air began to settle in, but Cole's body was still on fire with pain. His leg, though somewhat stabilized, still felt like a broken weight dragging him down with every step. His arm ached, but Rinya's quiet care had lessened the worst of the agony. She moved beside him with quiet confidence, her pace steady and sure, as if she had walked these lands for years. Her violet skin glowed faintly under the starlight, and the wind tousled her long hair. Her gaze was always ahead, always alert, and every so often she would glance at Cole with an expression that he could only guess at. Cole had many questions. Where was she taking him? Why was she helping him? He had no way of knowing what her people wanted. She hadn't said a word since the moment she had found him. In fact, she hadn't spoken at all, not once. But as they walked, Cole began to realize that words might not be needed. Rinya's gestures spoke louder than any language could. She would point ahead when they needed to stop, or tap a rock when she wanted to rest. If she saw a dangerous creature in the distance, she would make a small movement with her hand, signaling for Cole to stay still. The way she moved was fluid, almost like she was part of the desert itself. Cole tried to focus on his surroundings as much as possible, watching for any signs of life or even shelter. He could see the occasional movement in the distance, perhaps a bird or some small creature, but nothing close enough to be of any real concern. The desert, though alive with the whispers of the wind, felt empty, lifeless. His eyes kept drifting to Rinya. Her face was calm, almost serene, despite the strange, harsh world they were crossing. She never seemed to tire, never seemed to falter. How could she walk like this without showing any sign of struggle? Cole, on the other hand, was running on fumes. His body was weak, his vision blurred, but he wasn't about to admit it to her. He had to keep moving. He had no choice. As they crested a small rise, Rinya stopped. She turned to face him, her expression as unreadable as ever. Then she raised a hand and made a sweeping motion with her fingers. She pointed to a group of rocks ahead, and though Cole couldn't see anything in the growing darkness, he understood her signal. Shelter, a place to rest. With a grunt, Cole managed to limp toward the rocks. The pain in his leg had intensified, but he didn't want to show weakness. Not yet. Not when Rinya was offering him help without asking for anything in return. He had to keep going. They reached the shelter, a small alcove formed by a cluster of jagged rocks. It wasn't much, but it would protect them from the wind and the worst of the cold night air. Rinya knelt and started to arrange some of the sand and stones to create a small fire pit. She worked quickly, moving with the practiced precision of someone who had done this many times before. Cole watched her, his eyes barely staying open. She was unlike anyone he had ever met. The way she moved, the way she acted, it was all so different. Without a word, Rinya looked at him, then pointed to the fire pit and then to herself, miming the motion of eating. She gestured around them as if asking if there was food. Cole shook his head, though it didn't matter. He had no food. The crash had wiped out everything he had. His stomach growled in response, and he realized just how hungry he was. He had barely had time to think about food when the crash happened. Survival was the only thing that mattered. Still, there was something about Rinya's calm presence that kept him from feeling completely lost. Rinya, seeing his exhaustion, sat down across from him, her posture straight and watchful. She didn't seem bothered by the cold. She didn't even shiver. She just stared into the distance, her focus unwavering. The silence between them grew heavier, but it didn't feel uncomfortable. It felt peaceful. Cole, however, couldn't stay still. His mind was racing with questions, thoughts tumbling over one another, but none of them had any answers. Finally, he couldn't hold it in anymore. He broke the silence. "Who are you?" he asked softly, his voice hoarse. "Where am I? Why? Are you helping me?" Rinya's eyes flicked to him, but she didn't answer. Instead, she pointed to the sky. Her fingers traced the stars above, as if asking him to look. Cole did, his gaze following her hand as it pointed toward the heavens. For a long moment, Rinya said nothing, but the way she pointed to the stars told him more than any words could. She was showing him the sky, the same sky he had seen every day back on Earth. He had traveled far, far away from his home, yet the stars still looked the same. The universe was vast, and he was only a small part of it. Slowly, Cole understood. Rinya was showing him that no matter where he was, or what happened next, he wasn't truly alone. The stars, the night, the sky, it all connected them. The same sky that covered her home was the same one that stretched over Earth. They weren't so different after all. A warmth spread through Cole's chest, a feeling of connection that went beyond words. It didn't matter that they couldn't speak the same language. They could understand each other without needing to say a single thing. Rinya finally nodded, as if acknowledging his silent understanding. She reached into her pouch and pulled out a small, flat piece of food. It didn't look like anything Cole had ever seen, but she handed it to him. He hesitated, but took it, curious. The food tasted strange but edible, almost like a mix of dried fruits and something nutty. It wasn't much, but it was enough to ease the hunger that had gnawed at him for hours. As he chewed, Cole looked at Rinya again. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough but sincere. She simply nodded, giving him a small smile, a gesture of kindness that spoke louder than words ever could. The desert night was colder than Cole had expected. His body ached from the crash, and the long trek and the makeshift shelter of rocks didn't offer much warmth. Yet, despite the discomfort, Cole couldn't sleep. His mind raced with thoughts of the alien girl, Rinya, and the strange bond that seemed to be growing between them. She had saved his life, guided him through the harsh desert, and shared what little she had with him. But the questions in his mind remained unanswered. Rinya sat against a rock, her eyes always on the horizon, never once breaking her focus. She didn't sleep either. Cole had noticed that she barely rested. She was always alert, always watching. It was as if she knew something he didn't, but she wasn't ready to share it, and that made him uneasy. As he lay there, trying to find some comfort, a low wind began to stir, whistling through the cracks in the rocks. The sound grew louder and sharper, like the distant hum of an approaching storm. Cole's eyes snapped open and he could feel it. Something was coming. Rinya's posture immediately stiffened. She stood up in one smooth motion, scanning the sky. The wind picked up, swirling sand into the air. She turned to Cole, her face set in a determined expression, and made a quick motion with her hand, signaling for him to stay close. Cole didn't need to be told twice. He struggled to his feet, pain shooting through his body as he followed her. She led him quickly, her movements sure and steady, as though she knew exactly where she was going. The wind howled louder now, and the sky above began to change. Dark, clouds swirling in a menacing formation. They reached a narrow ravine, the rocky walls towering high on either side. Rinya moved into the shelter of the ravine with ease, pulling Cole after her. The air was thick with dust, and he could barely see her in the swirling haze. She stopped and turned to face him, her face serious. She pointed at the sky, and then at the ground, gesturing for Cole to take cover. As if on cue, the storm hit. The wind roared like a wild animal, slamming against the rocks with a force that made the ground tremble. The sand was sharp, stinging Cole's exposed skin, and the temperature dropped rapidly. He pulled his jacket tight around himself, trying to shield his face from the storm's fury. Rinya, however, seemed unaffected. She had found a small crevice in the rock where she crouched, waiting for the storm to pass. Cole followed her, trying to stay as close as possible. The storm howled around them, but within the ravine they were protected, shielded by the natural barrier of the rocks. For what felt like hours, they sat in the darkness, the storm raging outside. Cole's thoughts drifted again to Rinya. Why was she helping him? What did she want from him? Her silence spoke volumes, and it only left him with more questions. Finally, when the storm seemed to calm, the wind's intensity began to fade, and the air settled into an eerie silence. Cole could hear the soft rustle of sand shifting outside, but the worst of the storm had passed. Rinya stood up first, glancing around before turning back to Cole. She motioned for him to follow, and he did, though his legs were unsteady from exhaustion and pain. The storm had exhausted him, but Rinya's quiet determination pushed him onward. They continued their journey, though the landscape had changed. The sand was heavier now, thick and sticky with the remnants of the storm. The sky was dark, the stars hidden behind the clouds, and there was a chill in the air that made Cole shiver despite himself. After some time, they reached the base of a large cliff. The ground here was uneven, and the air was thick with dust. Rinya stopped and turned to him again, her expression softer now, though still serious. She pointed to the cliff and then to herself, making a climbing motion with her hands. Cole looked up at the cliff face. It was steep, rocky, and completely unfamiliar. His heart sank. He wasn't sure he could climb in his condition. His leg still hurt, and his arm was far from healed, but the look in Rinya's eyes told him that there was no choice. This was the only way forward. With a deep breath, Cole nodded. Rinya's eyes softened in acknowledgement, and she reached out to help him. The climb was slow and difficult. Cole's muscles screamed in protest with every movement. He couldn't rely on his legs, so he used his arms to pull himself up, but it was painful. Every time he reached for a rock, it felt like his strength was fading. But Rinya was there, guiding him. She pulled him up when he faltered, steadying him when he lost his grip. Her presence was like a quiet reassurance, always there, always watching but never rushing him. Finally, after what felt like hours, they reached the top. Cole collapsed onto the rocky ground, gasping for air. The view from the top was breathtaking. Below, the vast desert stretched out like an endless sea of sand. The storm was behind them now, and the sky had cleared, revealing a sea of stars. Rinya stood beside him, her face illuminated by the soft light of the stars. She didn't speak, but she looked out over the desert, as if contemplating something. Only she knew. For the first time since Cole had met her, he saw a flicker of something in her eyes, something deeper than just curiosity. It was a glimmer of thought, of memories perhaps. For a moment they both just stood there in silence, gazing out over the desert. Then, slowly, Rinya turned to him. She pointed to the stars again, then to her chest, and then to Cole. Her gesture was clear. She was telling him that they were both under the same sky, that they were both part of something bigger. Cole couldn't help but smile. He didn't know where this journey would take him, or what Rinya's people were like, but for the first time since the crash, he didn't feel so alone. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice hoarse from the climb and the storm. Rinya didn't respond with words, but she gave him a small nod, a simple, quiet gesture of understanding. And in that moment, Cole understood. She was guiding him not just through the desert, but through something deeper, a journey of survival. Yes, but also of connection. The following days were a blur of desert winds, endless sand, and rocky terrain. Cole's body had grown accustomed to the constant pain of his injuries, but he could feel his strength draining with each passing hour. His leg throbbed with every step, and his arm ached from the makeshift splint Rinya had fashioned out of the wreckage of his ship. Still, he pressed on, knowing that without Rinya he would have given up days ago. She was a mystery. Everything about her seemed so natural, like she had been born to survive in this harsh, alien world. While Cole struggled with every step, Rinya moved effortlessly across the landscape, always ahead of him, always with a quiet confidence. She had not once spoken, and though Cole tried to ask her questions, she always gave him a small gesture, pointing to the horizon, to the stars, or simply remaining silent. It was as if words weren't necessary. But Cole was beginning to understand. She didn't need words. Her actions spoke volumes, and somehow he could read the messages in them. The way she looked after him, the way she guided him, it wasn't just about survival. It was about trust, mutual trust that had been built in the most unlikely of circumstances. Today, however, something felt different. The air was warmer than usual, and the sun had climbed high in the sky, beating down on them with an intensity that made it almost impossible to continue walking. Cole felt himself growing weaker, and his movements became sluggish. His eyes burned with exhaustion, and his vision began to blur. He had never felt this bad before. The reality of how close he was to collapsing hit him hard. Rinya, as always, was ahead, moving at a steady pace. But when she noticed Cole lagging behind, she stopped. She turned to look at him, her eyes scanning his face as though she were reading something he couldn't see. Without a word, she stepped back to his side, gently touching his arm to get his attention. Cole could barely raise his head, but he managed a weak smile. "I'm fine," he said, though his voice cracked, betraying him. Rinya, however, wasn't convinced. She didn't argue, but instead, she gestured for him to follow her. Slowly, she led him off the main path they had been following. At first, Cole was confused. There was nothing but the desert around them, just miles and miles of sand and rock. But Rinya seemed to know exactly where she was going. She walked with purpose, her gaze fixed on a distant point ahead. As they moved further away from the path, the terrain began to change. The sand grew less sparse and small patches of green began to appear. Cole squinted, unsure if he was seeing things, but it wasn't his imagination. There were plants growing in the desert, sparse and scattered, but they were real. "Where are we going?" Cole asked, his voice barely a whisper. Rinya didn't answer, but she pointed to the distant horizon, where the land dipped into a small valley. She picked up her pace, and Cole struggled to keep up, using the last of his strength to follow her. It didn't take long before they reached the bottom of the valley. To Cole's surprise, nestled in the middle of the rocky terrain was a small, hidden oasis. A stream of fresh water trickled through the center of the clearing, surrounded by clusters of green plants and trees. The air here was cool and fresh, a stark contrast to the dry, oppressive desert outside. It was like stepping into another world entirely. Rinya led him to the water's edge, where she knelt and began to scoop water into her hands, drinking deeply. Cole, too weak to do anything but watch, sat down on a nearby rock. His body ached for water, for food, for rest. But there was something about this place, something that made him feel like he had stepped into a dream. He took a deep breath and slowly crawled to the water. His hands shook as he cupped them and drank. The coolness of the water was a relief, soothing his parched throat. For a few moments he let the silence settle around him, grateful for the peace of the oasis. Rinya watched him silently, as always. Her face was calm, her eyes fixed on him with quiet intensity. Cole wondered what she was thinking. What was she doing here? Why had she saved him? Why had she brought him to this hidden oasis in the middle of nowhere? "I don't understand," Cole finally muttered. "Why are you helping me? You don't even know me. Why do you care?" Rinya didn't respond with words, but her eyes softened. She gestured to the oasis around them as if to say, "This is my home, in a way. This is where I come from. I protect what is mine." Cole looked around at the lush greenery, the stream that seemed to flow from nowhere, and the peace that surrounded them. He understood, but not entirely. There was still so much he didn't know. Still so much about her people, about the planet. He looked at her again, and this time, her gaze didn't feel distant. It felt like a bond, like a promise that they weren't so different after all. Maybe, in this strange, vast universe, they were both just trying to survive, to find a way to make it through, against all odds. After a while, Rinya stood and motioned, for him to follow. She didn't speak, but Cole understood. She was ready to move on. He nodded slowly, reluctant to leave the peaceful oasis, but knowing that there was more to be done, more to discover. Rinya led him deeper into the valley where the landscape began to change again. The ground grew firmer, and the trees became denser. It was clear they were heading towards something, but Cole wasn't sure what. As they walked, Cole's mind wandered. He had always been a soldier, a man of action, of plans and missions. But out here, in this alien world, he had no plan. He was at the mercy of the planet, of Rinya, of whatever fate had thrown his way. He had no choice but to trust her, to trust that she would guide him, keep him safe. Rinya glanced over her shoulder once, her eyes meeting his, and for the first time, she gave him a small, knowing smile. It wasn't much, but it was enough. In that moment, Cole realized something. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was learning. Learning from Rinya, from the desert, from the stars, and maybe he was beginning to understand a little more about what it meant to truly be alive. Days had passed since Cole and Rinya had found the oasis. The weather had shifted, and the once scorching desert heat had softened into a more tolerable warmth. The landscape had become lush, filled with more plants, more water, and an almost mystical tranquility that Cole had never expected to find on an alien world. But with each passing day, a deep feeling of unease grew within him. He still didn't understand Rinya fully. She was kind and silent, guiding him with purpose, but the questions were too many to ignore. Why had she saved him? Why had she brought him here? Cole's thoughts were interrupted when Rinya stopped in front of him, holding out her hand to signal for him to stay. The land ahead of them had changed again. The lush greenery had given way to a more rugged, rocky terrain. Towering cliffs rose to the left, and the sound of rushing water echoed from a hidden gorge ahead. Rinya's sharp eyes scanned the area, and she turned back to Cole. She raised her hand and motioned for him to follow, but then she held her finger to her lips, an unmistakable gesture to be quiet. Cole nodded, his heart pounding with curiosity. He had learned over the past days that when Rinya made these kinds of gestures, something important was coming. She was leading him toward something, and he didn't know what. They crept closer, moving carefully through the rocks. The ground was uneven, and Cole stumbled a few times, but Rinya was always there to steady him. Finally, they reached a small ridge, and Cole looked out over the valley. His breath caught in his throat. Ahead, hidden within a grove of trees, was a structure, unlike anything Cole had ever seen. It was a stone building, ancient and covered with vines, but the design was unlike anything on Earth. There were symbols etched into the walls, strange, swirling patterns that seemed to pulse with a faint glow, almost as if they were alive. The building was partially submerged in the earth, its roof barely visible among the tree branches, as if the land had slowly swallowed it over centuries. Cole's heart raced. This was no ordinary structure. It was a relic, a remnant of an ancient civilization, perhaps even older than the planet itself. Rinya turned to him and placed a finger against her lips again, urging him to stay silent. She gestured toward the structure, then pointed at herself and then at Cole. The message was clear. Whatever this place was, they had to approach carefully. Without another word, Rinya led him down the ridge and toward the stone building. They moved slowly, staying close to the shadows, avoiding the clear paths. As they approached, Cole could hear the faintest hum, a low vibration that seemed to come from the stones themselves. When they reached the structure, Rinya crouched low, signaling for Cole to do the same. She approached the wall and began tracing her fingers over the symbols. Her touch was delicate, almost reverent, and as her fingers moved across the patterns, a soft light flickered in the air. Cole's eyes widened. The symbols were reacting to her touch, responding to something only she seemed to understand. After a few moments, Rinya stepped back, her face serious. She nodded at Cole, urging him to follow her. She led him to the side of the building where a large stone slab stood. It was massive, at least 5 feet tall, and seemed to block a doorway of some kind. But Rinya didn't seem fazed. She pushed gently on the stone, and with a grinding sound, it began to move. Cole's eyes widened in surprise. He had no idea how she was able to move the massive stone, but Rinya did it with ease. The doorway was revealed, a dark passage leading deep into the earth. Rinya motioned for Cole to follow her again, and despite his growing anxiety, he complied. As they descended into the darkness, the air grew cooler, and the faint hum of energy that had filled the outside faded into silence. They reached the bottom of a set of stairs and found themselves in a large chamber. The walls were covered with more symbols, but this time they seemed more intricate, more detailed. They glowed faintly, casting an eerie light around the room. In the center of the chamber stood a stone pedestal. On it rested a small object, a glowing crystal that radiated with a soft, pulsating light. It was mesmerizing, and Cole couldn't look away. He felt drawn to it, as if it was calling to him. Rinya moved toward the pedestal, her eyes locked on the crystal. She reached out with a steady hand, and as her fingers brushed the crystal, the hum returned. It was louder now, vibrating through the floor and into Cole's bones. He took a cautious step forward, his eyes never leaving Rinya. She had a look of concentration on her face, but there was something else. A hint of something deeper, a secret. That was just beyond his understanding. "What is it?" Cole asked, his voice barely a whisper. Rinya didn't answer right away. Instead, she carefully picked up the crystal and turned toward Cole. Her eyes were filled with an emotion he couldn't place, something between sorrow and determination. She handed the crystal to him, her movements slow and deliberate. Cole hesitated, looking at the object in his hands. It was small, not much bigger than a fist, and it hummed with a strange energy. As his fingers wrapped around it, he felt a surge of warmth spread through his body. The sensation was unlike anything he had ever felt before, an energy that was both comforting and overwhelming at the same time. "Take it," Rinya said softly, her voice carrying a weight that Cole hadn't heard before. "You must understand." Cole stared at her, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know what she meant, but something in her tone told him that this moment was important. Whatever this crystal was, it was the key to understanding Rinya, to understanding everything. As he held the crystal in his hands, a sudden realization hit him. He wasn't just stranded on some alien planet. He was part of something much bigger, something that reached beyond survival, beyond the desert, beyond this ancient structure. Rinya had brought him here for a reason. She wasn't just a guide, she was part of this world's history, and now it seemed that history was about to reveal itself. Cole stood still, his hands trembling as he cradled the glowing crystal. The soft hum that filled the room seemed to grow louder, vibrating in his chest. The air around him felt thick, with energy, as though the very walls were alive. For a moment he wondered if he had made a mistake, but something deep inside him told him that this was a moment he couldn't turn back from. Rinya watched him closely, her expression unreadable. Her eyes, always so intense, seemed to soften as she stepped back, giving him space. Her silence spoke volumes, more than words could ever do. She wasn't just showing him this place, she was entrusting him with something far more important. Cole's mind raced. What was this crystal? Why did it feel so powerful in his hands? He could feel its warmth, its pulse, but he still didn't understand its purpose. Was it a tool, a weapon, or something else entirely? His gaze moved to Rinya. She was watching him, waiting for something. She had led him here for a reason, and now it felt as if the weight of the entire world rested on his next move. "The crystal chooses its bearer," Rinya continued, her gaze shifting to meet his. "It chose you, Cole. You are connected to this world now, whether you want to be or not." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. The realization hit him like a watt to be here. Rinya's voice broke through his thoughts. "The crystal is a key to the knowledge of my people. It can restore what was lost. It can bring balance to this world once more." Cole's mind raced. What kind of balance? What had happened to her people? Why had they disappeared? Before he could ask, Rinya lowered the crystal and placed it gently back on the pedestal. The glowing light began to fade, and the hum grew quieter, but it didn't stop entirely. The energy was still there, lingering in the air, in the ground, in everything around them. Rinya turned to face him fully now, her eyes serious. "My people, we were not always as we are now. We were once great, connected to the land and the stars. But something happened. A darkness fell upon us, and we were scattered. The crystal holds the memories of what was lost." Cole felt a chill run down his spine. This was more than just survival. This was about rediscovering something forgotten, something lost to time, and somehow he was now a part of it. "But you," Rinya said, her gaze steady, "you can help us remember. You can help us rebuild." Cole felt a surge of purpose that he hadn't known in a long time. For the first time since the crash, he no longer felt like a stranger in this world. He didn't know exactly how he could help, or what it would mean for his future, but he understood that this was his destiny now. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about restoring what was lost, helping Rinya's people find their way back to what they once were. The chamber was silent now, the energy settling into a quiet hum that resonated with the walls. Rinya stepped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Thank you, Cole. You have a purpose here. You have a place." Cole met her gaze, his heart pounding in his chest. He had no idea what lay ahead, but for the first time, he felt ready. Whatever journey they were about to begin, he knew he wouldn't be alone. Rinya was with him, and together they would uncover the secrets of the past and maybe even save this world. As they turned to leave the chamber, the crystal's light flickered one last time, as if acknowledging their bond. It was a promise of hope, of change, and of the future. And with that, Cole and Rinya stepped into the unknown, ready to face whatever came next.